The courtroom was cold in a way that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I sat with my back straight and my hands folded on top of the old leather purse in my lap, the same purse I'd carried to church for 19 years, and I listened to the sound of expensive shoes crossing the stone floor. Click, click, click. There is a particular sound a room makes when everyone in it has already decided you are pitiful. It is very quiet. It is the quiet of people being polite about your ruin. Across the aisle sat my son. Damon would not look at me. 38 years old in the good gray suit I had helped him pick out for his own wedding, and he sat with his head bowed toward the table like a boy who had been sent to the principal's office. Beside him, close enough to murmur into his ear, was a man named Brandon Kessler, and Kessler was smiling the small, patient smile of a man who has done this before and expects to do it again. He wore a watch that cost more than the piano in my living room. He kept touching my son's sleeve. At the front of the room, their attorney, Mr. Gregory Hale Gray at the temples, kind, looking in the way that expensive men learn to look kind, was arranging his papers to stand up and explain to a judge that I, Lara Bennett, 64 years old, could no longer be trusted to remember my own address. I want to tell you what I felt sitting there. From the outside, I looked calm. Folded hands, dry eyes. A woman waiting for a bus. But inside my chest, something was screaming because the child I had once rocked to sleep against that very shoulder was sitting a few feet away, waiting to tell a stranger in a robe that his mother had lost her mind. They thought that was the fight. They came to court to prove I had lost my memory, but I had spent 3 years watching my husband's memory leave him one room at a time. I know exactly what forgetting looks like. I have held it in my arms, and I was not forgetting anything. I was remembering everything. Let me back up, because to understand what happened in that room, you have to understand what they were trying to take. My name is Lara Bennett, and for 31 years every Saturday morning, my living room was the loudest, most joyful place on Maple Grove Street. That was the day the children came. Neighborhood kids 7 and 8 and 9 years old, tracking in leaves in the fall and mud in the spring, lining up on my sofa with their scuffed sneakers, not quite reaching the floor, waiting for their turn at the piano. I never charged a dime. Not once, not to anybody in 31 years. My mother used to say that a thing you're given for free, you carry for the rest of your life. And she was right. I've had grown men 40 years old stop me in the grocery store to hum the first song I ever taught them. Saturday Notes, the kids called it. That's what it said on the little hand-painted sign one of them made me still tape to my front window. Saturday Notes. All welcome, no money. The piano they learned on was an old upright dark walnut with 3 ivory keys near the top that had yellowed with age. It didn't come that way. When we bought it second-hand, it was barely more than firewood warped out of tune. One pedal snapped clean off. My husband spent an entire winter fixing it in the garage. Samuel Bennett could fix anything with his hands and enough time. He restrung it, refinished it, tuned it by ear over so many evenings I stopped counting. And when he was finally done, he rolled it into the living room, sat down and played As Time Goes By, with 2 fingers and a grin, because that was the only song he knew. That piano was the sound of my whole life. Remember it. It matters later. Now let me tell you about the house, because you need to love it the way I did before you understand what it cost me. Samuel and I bought that house in 1986. You have to understand what that meant for people like us in that year in that city. We had saved for 11 years. 11 years of a jar on top of the refrigerator of me taking in extra piano students and Samuel working Saturdays at the plant. And even with the money in hand, 2 banks turned us away before the third one didn't turn us away with a smile, the way they'd learned to do it by then, telling us the neighborhood wasn't a good fit for the loan. My Samuel was a proud man, and I watched that pride bend in those bank lobbies, and I watched it stand back up straight the day we got the keys. That house was not real estate. That house was a war we won. When Damon was small, he used to crawl underneath that piano while I gave lessons and lie on his back in the shadows, listening his little chest rising and falling with the music. He grew up under those strings. I need you to hold on to that image because I have never been able to let go of it. Let me give you just one Saturday so you can see what they were trying to take. It's a morning in October, maybe 15 years back. 9 children on and around that sofa, and a 10th a stubborn little boy named Deshaun, who swore up and down he hadn't touched a piano all week, though his fingers already knew right where to go. The windows are open. Somebody's mother is out on the porch talking to somebody else's mother. And halfway through the lesson, the front door opens, and there's my Samuel home early from his shift, carrying a pitcher of lemonade and a stack of paper cups. And he sets them down without a word and lowers himself into the armchair in the corner just to listen. He did that most Saturdays in the years when he still could. He'd sit in that chair with his eyes half closed and a little smile on his face, listening to a house full of other people's children make a beautiful racket. And once when they'd all gone home, he took my hand and said, "Laura, we built ourselves a good loud life." That was Samuel. He measured wealth in noise and in children who weren't even ours. Because that is who my husband was, and you have to know it to understand what came after. Samuel Bennett worked more than 30 years at the same plant and never once called in a favor he could do himself. He fixed the neighbors' porches. He fixed their cars in our driveway on Sundays and waved off the money. He couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. That man knew exactly one song on the piano he'd built with his own hands, but he'd sit and listen to me play for hours like it was the finest thing in the world. When the doctors first said the word dementia, we were sitting in a cold little office not unlike a courtroom, and Samuel, who had understood maybe half of it, reached over and patted my knee and said, "Don't you worry, girl. Whatever I forget, you'll remember for both of us." He meant it as comfort. He had no idea he was handing me the shape of the rest of my life. I did remember for both of us. I remembered so hard I started writing it all down out loud every night, so not one grain of him would slip away from me. And it never once occurred to me in all those years of remembering for the two of us that one day my remembering would be the only thing standing between me and ruin. Samuel died 4 years ago. He did not die all at once. That would have been a mercy, and mercy was not what we were given. He died the long way over 3 years of a disease that took his mind before it took his body. Dementia. First, it was keys and names. Then it was faces. Near the end, he would look at me across the breakfast table, the same table where we'd counted out that jar of money in 1986, and ask very politely if I was the nurse. And I would say, "Yes, sweetheart, I'm the nurse," and butter his toast because it was easier for him that way. I learned something in those 3 years that saved my life, though I didn't know it yet. To keep up with his medications, his appointments, all the small daily details that kept slipping through my own exhausted fingers, I started talking into my phone. A voice memo every day. Monday, Samuel's blue pill at 8, the white one at noon. Dr. Ellison at 2 on Thursday. He ate half a sandwich today. He knew my name for 11 minutes this morning, and I am writing it down, so I never forget that he came back to me even for 11 minutes. I have thousands of them. I still make one every single day. It became the shape of my mind, a woman who records the truth, so the truth can't be stolen from her. Remember that, too. After Samuel passed, the house got very quiet, but the children still came on Saturdays, and I was all right. I was. And then about 6 months ago, my son brought a man to my door. Damon had been struggling, I knew that much. His auto shop was bleeding money, and my granddaughter Nia, 16 and sharp as a tack, had been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes the year before, and the two things together had my boy looking older than his years. So when he showed up one afternoon with Brandon Kessler of Heritage Legacy Advisors, a man in a beautiful suit who called me Miss Laura before he'd earned my first name, I let them in. I made coffee. I was polite. Mr. Kessler wanted to talk to me about my house. He had charts. He had a soft, warm voice and a way of leaning forward like everything you said was the wisest thing he'd heard all week. He explained that I should move my home into something called a trust for the taxes. He said for the family, for my own protection. He used the word protection a great deal, and I sat there and smiled and poured his coffee, and something in the back of my neck went cold because I have lived 64 years in a body that God gave me good instincts, and every instinct I had was telling me this smiling man was measuring my house for its bones. I said no, politely, but I said no. And Mr. Kessler smiled and said of course, and that he'd leave his card, and he did. That should have been the end of it. 2 weeks later, I started to feel unwell. It came on slow. A dizziness in the mornings. A fog behind my eyes I couldn't blink away. I'd walk into the kitchen and forget why. I left the stove on once who had cooked 10,000 meals in that kitchen without once leaving a burner lit. My blood pressure medication had been refilled by a care coordinator, a pleasant young woman Kessler had recommended to help me stay on top of things, and I took my pills every day like a good patient, and every day the fog got a little thicker. I thought I was getting old. I thought, God help me, that maybe this was how it had started for Samuel, and I was so frightened of that thought that I didn't say it out loud to anyone. I did not understand yet what was being done to me. I would, but not yet. Then came the 12th of March. I remember the date because I write everything down. Damon came over on a Tuesday evening and he wasn't alone. His lawyer was in the car, though. I didn't know that then. And he sat across from me at the breakfast table and slid a thick stack of papers toward me, and he could not meet my eyes while he did it. I asked him what it was. He said, "Mama, I'm just trying to take care of you now." I asked him again and I picked up the papers, and the fog cleared just long enough for me to read the words at the top of the page. Petition for conservatorship. I knew enough to know what that meant. It meant my son was asking a court to declare that I could no longer manage my own affairs. It meant control of my money, my accounts, my house. It meant they wanted to take the deed we'd bought with 11 years and 2 rejections, and one man's bent, then straightened pride, and the piano my husband built with his own 2 hands and the Saturday mornings, and put it all in the keeping of a man in a beautiful suit. "I'm just trying to take care of you," my son said again. I looked at him for a long time, and then I set the papers down, and I did not cry, and I did not shout. I said one thing quiet, the way you say a thing you have fully decided. "You want to tell a judge I don't remember who I am?" I picked up my purse. "Then I suppose I'll have to go remind you who I am." The next morning, fog and all, I drove myself to the office of a young attorney named Denise Carter. And that is where the real story begins. Denise Carter's office was on the 2nd floor above a tax preparer and a nail salon, and it did not look like the office of a woman who won. That was the first thing I liked about her. No mahogany, no fountains, no expensive men learning to look kind. Just a young black woman, maybe 35, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair and case files stacked on the windowsill because she'd run out of shelves. She read my petition twice all the way through, and she did not interrupt me once while I talked, and when I finished, she took off the glasses and told me the truth. I have come to believe that is the rarest thing a person can do for you. "Miss Bennett, I'm going to be honest with you, because you strike me as a woman who's had enough of the other thing." She folded her hands. "Conservatorship cases are hard to win from where you're sitting. Judges want to protect vulnerable people, and that instinct is a good one, but it cuts against you here. If there's a doctor's letter and a family member both saying you can't manage your affairs, the court starts out believing them. They don't have to prove you're gone. They just have to make you look gone. One confused moment on that witness stand, one wrong date, one lost train of thought, and it's over. And believe me, their lawyer will work very hard to give you that moment." I told her about the fog, the dizziness, the stove, the way I'd started to wonder if I was following my Samuel down that long, dark hall. She got very still. "When did it start?" "After I switched pharmacies," I said. "There's a young woman, a care coordinator, handles my refills now. Mr. Kessler recommended her. Denise Carter looked at me for a long moment, and I watched a whole idea arrive behind her eyes. I want you to do something, she said carefully. I want you to stop taking that refill. Today. And I want you to go see your own doctor, the one you had before any of these people showed up, and I want a full blood panel. She wrote something down. And Miss Bennett saved the bottle. I stopped that night. I want to tell you what happened, because I lived a lot of years before I understood how it feels to have your own mind handed back to you. Within 3 days, the fog lifted like a curtain going up. Within a week, I was myself sharper than I'd been in months, wide awake at the piano, remembering the middle names of children I hadn't taught in decades. And with that clarity came a cold, clean anger, because now I understood. I had not been losing my mind. Someone had been taking it a little at a time in a brown plastic bottle, so that when the day came, a judge would look at me and see exactly what they needed him to see. I went to see Dr. Yolanda Reese, who'd been my physician for 22 years, and had delivered exactly none of the opinions Kessler's man had. I brought the bottle the way Denise told me to. Dr. Reese turned it over in her hands, read the label, and got very quiet. That same quiet I was learning that careful people get right before they tell you something is badly wrong. She ran the full panel. And when the results came back, she called me into her office herself instead of leaving it to the nurse. And she sat across from me and said, "Lara, this prescription isn't what your chart calls for. The dosage is wrong, and there's a second compound in here that has no business being in your regimen, and the two together at your age would absolutely cause confusion, dizziness, memory lapses. Exactly what your son's been describing." She set the bottle down between us like it was evidence, which it was. "Who changed your medication?" "A young woman a financial advisor sent me," I said. Dr. Reese looked at me over her glasses for a long moment. "Then you keep every scrap of paper from that pharmacy," she said, "and you don't take one more pill you didn't watch me prescribe. Do you understand me?" I did. I understood better than she knew. I understood that the fog I'd been so terrified was Samuel's disease coming for me had been poured into me on purpose by people who needed an old woman to look empty. And I understood, sitting in that office with my mind clear as a bell for the first time in months, that I was not going to sign one single thing. They had drugged an old woman to make her look like an old woman. The settlement offer came the following week through the lawyers. It was generous, Mr. Hale's letter said. Consider it. If I would sign over control of my affairs voluntarily, no ugly hearing, no public embarrassment, I would be granted a life estate. I could stay in my house until I died. They would manage everything else. It was framed, every line of it, as a kindness to a confused old woman who ought to be grateful. I read it twice the way Denise had read my petition. Then I set it down. "They want me to sign my house over to keep living in it," I said. "In my own home, that I bought." "You don't have to take it," Denise said. "But I need you to understand, if you refuse, there's no more politeness. They will stand up in open court and take you apart in front of your son. They'll make you cry if they can. That's the strategy." I thought about Samuel bending in those bank lobbies and standing back up. "I don't need their mercy," I said. "I need them to be afraid of the truth. Now you asked me if there's any record of what these people have been doing." I set my purse on her desk and took out my phone. "I've made a voice recording every single day for 7 years. Thousands of them. Every appointment, every visitor, everything anyone's ever said in my kitchen." I looked at her. "Mr. Kessler has been in my kitchen more than once." For the first time, Denise Carter smiled. "Go home," she said, "and pull every day that man was in your house." 3 nights before the hearing, someone knocked at my back door. It was Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, Damon's wife. She'd kept her distance through all of this, and I'd assumed she was on his side, or at least too loyal to be on mine. But the woman standing on my back step in the dark had been crying for some time, and she wouldn't come inside like she hadn't earned the right. "I can't be part of this, Miss Lara," she said. "But I can't stand here and say nothing either. There are things you need to know before you walk into that room." I made her come in. I made her sit. And then Vanessa told me the truth about my son, and it changed the shape of my anger. Damon was not doing this because he was greedy. Damon was doing this because he was drowning. The shop had been underwater for 2 years. Nia's insulin, her monitors, the specialists, the copays alone were burying them, and my proud, foolish boy had been too ashamed to come to his mother and say, "I can't afford to keep my daughter alive." And into that shame, that exact soft spot, had walked Brandon Kessler. He told Damon it was the responsible thing, Vanessa said, twisting a tissue in her hands. That taking over your finances would let him protect you and handle the family's bills at the same time. He made it sound like paperwork, like being a good son. She looked up at me. "But I found the real documents, Miss Lara. It's not a trust to protect you. It's management fees, thousands a month to his company, and a reverse mortgage on the house. They strip everything. By the time it's done, there's no house, there's no money, and Damon's name is on all of it, so he takes the fall and Kessler walks away clean." Her voice broke. "He thinks he's saving us. He doesn't understand what he signed." Then she said the thing that turned the whole case in my hands like a key. "He's done it before, Kessler. There were 2 other families on the east side. Older folks owned their homes, free and clear homes that had been in the family for generations. Both lost everything the same way, same company, same smile." She wrote the name of Kessler's firm on my grocery pad, and under it, 2 family names. "I think you're not the first old woman he's tried to make disappear." I sat with that a long time after she left. My son was not the shark. My son was bait thrashing in the water, and he'd been convinced the shark was a lifeguard. Denise had asked me to go back through every recording from every day Kessler set foot in my house, and so that is how I spent the nights before the hearing, not sleeping, because sleep had left me weeks before, but sitting at the kitchen table under one lamp with a legal pad and 7 years of my own voice. I want to tell you what that was like because it was not what I expected. I had gone looking for evidence. What I found first was my whole life. There I was years back listing Samuel's medications in a tired voice at midnight. There I was recording the 11 minutes one Tuesday morning when he'd known my name. I'd forgotten I'd saved that, and when his voice came through the little speaker, weak and warm, saying, "There's my Lara," I put my head down on that table and cried the way I hadn't let myself cry at the funeral. Hours of it. Grocery lists and doctor's numbers, and threaded all through them a marriage. Whoever these people were who decided I was empty-headed, they had never once considered that the fullest-headed woman in the county might be the one they'd picked to rob. I pulled the days Denise wanted, a handful of afternoons when that smiling man had sat at my table. I set them aside for her, and I did not let myself dwell on them because I had learned by then not to tip my own hand, not even to myself. I'll only say that when Denise listened to what was on them, she went very quiet, and then she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "Miss Lara, they have no idea what's coming." I told her to keep it that way. Word had gotten around the neighborhood by then, the way word does. And here's the thing the men in the good suits never understand about a street like mine. We are not alone on it. Not ever. Wednesday evening, Miss Ruthie from 2 doors down showed up with a foil pan of baked chicken and the flat announcement that she'd be at that courthouse with bells on. And if that judge wanted to call Lara Bennett confused, he could explain to her face how a confused woman had taught her grandbabies to read music. A retired school teacher named Cornelius, who'd never said 50 words to me in 20 years, offered to testify to my character and showed up to the hearing in a suit older than my marriage. 2 of my grown Saturday children drove in from 3 hours away. I hadn't asked a soul. That is what those men had failed to price into their arithmetic, that the very thing they were trying to steal, that loud good life Samuel and I had built, was also an army, and it was already lacing up its shoes. Still, an army can't sit inside your chest at 3 in the morning. That part you do alone. The phone rang at 2 in the morning. I knew before I answered that it would be Nia because 16-year-olds are the only people who call at 2 in the morning and the only people brave enough to. She was crying so hard I could barely make her out. "Grandma, I heard them. I know what Dad's doing." A ragged breath. "I don't want the house. I don't want any of it. I don't care about the money. I want you. Please don't let them make you go away." I stood in my dark kitchen holding the phone, and I told my granddaughter to hush now, to say nothing to anyone, to do nothing at all. I told her everything was going to be all right. And as I said it, something quiet and certain settled into place inside me, because a girl who would call her grandmother crying at 2 in the morning is a girl who is not afraid of the truth. I filed that away too. On the morning of the hearing, I woke before the sun. I made my coffee. I sat at the breakfast table where we'd counted the money in 1986, and I did not rush. Then I went to my closet, and I put on the blue dress, the soft cornflower one Samuel always said made me look like the girl he'd married. I hadn't worn it since the funeral. I fixed my hair. I put on my mother's small gold earrings. I looked at myself in the mirror for a good while, a 64-year-old woman in her husband's favorite dress, and I did not see anyone confused. I saw someone who remembered exactly who she was. I drove myself to the courthouse, fog-free, every turn of the way. I saw Damon before he saw me across the wide stone lobby. He was standing with Kessler and the lawyer, and he looked terrible, hollowed out 10 years older, a man who had not slept. For 1 second, our eyes met across all that marble. He looked away first. I gripped my old leather purse a little tighter. Inside it was my phone, and inside the phone was 7 years of the truth, and one afternoon in particular that a smiling man had no idea I'd kept. Then I lifted my chin, and I walked into that courtroom to remind my son who I was. The Honorable Eleanor Price presided, a spare woman with silver hair and a face that gave away nothing, and I decided early that I liked her for it. She had the look of someone who had spent 30 years listening to people lie and had grown very good at waiting. Mr. Hale stood to make his opening, and I will give him this: he was good at his work. He did not shout. He did not sneer. He spoke about me the way you'd speak about a beloved old dog that had started to bite, with a warmth so practiced it took me a moment to feel the knife inside it. Your Honor, no one in this room doubts that Laura Bennett was once a capable, even remarkable woman. Was. He let the word sit. A teacher, a pillar of her community. But we are not here to honor who Mrs. Bennett was. We are here, sadly, to protect who she has become. The evidence will show a pattern any of us with aging parents will recognize with a heavy heart. A stove left burning, bills unpaid and then paid twice, money given away to near strangers, confusion about dates, about places, about time itself. Her own son, a devoted son who has agonized over this, will tell you he simply cannot stand by and watch his mother come to harm. He turned and looked at me, then gently sorrowfully the way you look at weather. We ask the court to do the kind thing, the hard thing, to let this family care for a woman who can no longer care for herself. I sat with my hands folded, and I did not move a muscle. And I want to tell you what that costs to sit still while a stranger describes your funeral to a judge. Every instinct in a person's body says stand up, shout, defend yourself. But I had learned something from 31 years at that piano. You do not rush the hard passage. You hold your tempo. You let the silence do the work. So I held still, and I let the whole room watch a calm woman listen to herself being buried, and I trusted that some of them would notice the arithmetic didn't add up. Then they called their witnesses. Dr. Alan Foster took the stand first. A tired, decent enough man who under Denise's questioning admitted his entire evaluation of me had lasted 15 minutes in an office I'd been referred to by a family financial advisor, and that he had not reviewed my medical history, spoken to my regular physician, or been told that my medications had recently been changed. He used phrases like presence with mild disorientation and consistent with early cognitive decline. Denise chipped at him and she drew blood 15 minutes. No history, a referral from the very man who stood to profit, but I watched Judge Price's face, and I could see it wasn't enough yet. A doctor had said the word decline out loud in a courtroom, and words like that leave a stain that logic doesn't always wash out. Then Hale called a woman named Patricia Doyle, a branch manager from my bank, and I understood at once that they had gone looking through my accounts for anything that could be dressed up to look like folly. Mrs. Doyle testified uncomfortably. She kept glancing at me like she wished she were anywhere else. That some months back I had come into the branch and withdrawn $4,000 in a cashier's check made out to a young man who was not a relative. She had found it unusual, concerning even for a woman my age. Hale walked her through it slowly, letting the number hang in the air, $4,000, to a stranger nodding along like it was the saddest thing he'd ever heard, another old woman giving her money away to whoever asked. When he sat down, he looked satisfied. He shouldn't have. Denise rose and asked exactly one round of questions. Mrs. Doyle, did Mrs. Bennet appear to understand the transaction she was making that day? Yes. She filled out the paperwork herself. Did she know the young man's name? She did. She wrote it on the memo line. Would you read the court what she wrote on the memo line of that check? Mrs. Doyle looked down at the copy in her hands, and something in her face softened. It says fall semester books and board. The young man's name is Terence Booker, isn't it? Denise said. Do you know who that is, Mrs. Doyle? Because I do. Terence Booker sat on Laura Bennett's living room sofa when he was 7 years old and couldn't afford lessons, and she taught him for 5 years and never charged his mother a cent. He's the first person in his family to go to college. That stranger Mrs. Bennet gave $4,000 to is a boy she raised on Saturday mornings for free, and she knew his name, his school, and his semester well enough to write them on the memo line of a check. Denise let it settle. Is it your testimony, Mrs. Doyle, that a woman who remembers a child she taught more than a decade ago and pays his tuition on purpose is a woman who has lost her mind, or is it possible she is simply more generous than the people who dragged her account statements into this room? Mrs. Doyle said quietly, it was a scholarship. Anyone could see it was a scholarship. Nothing further. And I watched that one land. I watched Judge Price make a small note, because that is the thing they never counted on. Every single confused act they'd gone digging for turned out, when you held it up to the light, to be an act of love they simply couldn't imagine an old black woman being clear-headed enough to choose. They had mistaken my generosity for my decline. It was the first crack in their whole case, and I saw Hale feel it go. And then they called my son. Damon walked to that stand like a man walking to his own sentencing. He was sworn in with his hand shaking on the Bible, and when Mr. Hale asked him gently to tell the court what he'd witnessed, my boy started to talk, and I heard in his voice something I hadn't heard since he was small, and had broken something and was trying to confess before he lost his nerve. He told them about the stove. He told them about the mornings I couldn't finish a sentence, the afternoons I forgot he'd come by. He told them I'd gotten lost driving to the store I'd driven to for 30 years. And here's the thing that broke my heart clean in half. He wasn't lying. Every word of it was true. It had all happened. He had watched it happen and been terrified, and no one had ever told him that the fog he was describing came in a brown plastic bottle from a woman Kessler sent. My son sat up there and testified honestly to the symptoms of a poisoning he didn't know was happening, and he believed every word was proof he was saving me. I love my mother, he said at the end, and his voice cracked on it, and he looked at his hands. I just want her to be safe. I sat and watched my child say those words, and I will tell you that no cross-examination anyone has ever devised could have hurt me the way it hurt to hear the truth in them. Because he meant it. That was the whole horror of it. Every ugly, wrong, ruinous thing my son was doing, he was doing out of the exact love I'd spent 38 years pouring into him, and Kessler had found a way to turn that love like a key in a lock and open my boy right up. I thought about all the nights I'd rocked him through fevers. I thought about teaching him to drive in the church parking lot, both of us laughing. I thought about the man in the good suit who had looked at all that love and seen only a tool he could use. And I understood sitting there that I was not really fighting my son at all. I was fighting the thing that had gotten its hooks into him. If I hated anyone in that room, and I try not to hate my mother, raised me better, it was not the shaking man on the witness stand. It was the calm one at the table behind him checking his expensive watch. Denise did what she could. She got him to admit the incidents had all begun within weeks of the medication change. She planted the question, when did this start exactly, and let it hang. But you cannot cross-examine a son's tears, not in front of a judge. And when Damon stepped down, the whole room was heavy with the awful, tender weight of a good boy doing a terrible thing for love. I could feel it slipping. I want to be honest with you about that. Sitting there in Samuel's favorite blue dress, I could feel the case sliding toward them, and for one moment, the fear got its hand around my throat. Then Judge Price called the noon recess, and everything I had left came down to the next few hours. He found me in the corridor outside the courtroom. I hadn't expected it. I was standing by the tall windows with Denise a few steps off, and Damon came across that marble floor toward me, the way he used to come to me as a boy when he'd had a nightmare half running, then catching himself, then slowing ashamed. He stopped an arm's length away. Up close he looked worse. Up close I could see he'd been crying too. "Mama." His voice was low, ragged. "Please, you could still take the settlement. You could still nobody has to go through the rest of this. I'm doing this for you. I need you to believe that. Everything I'm doing it for you." And I looked at my son, the child who had grown up on his back in the shadows under his father's piano, listening to the music rise up through the strings above his face, and I felt the deepest grief of my whole long life. Not anger, grief, because I could see he believed it. That was the worst part. He truly believed he was saving me. I kept my voice very quiet. Quiet is stronger than loud. My mother taught me that too. "You learned to fall asleep under that piano," I said. "Do you remember your daddy built it with his own 2 hands, and you'd lie underneath it while I taught, and I'd look down between the lessons, and there you'd be this little chest going up and down with the music?" I searched his face. "Now you want to sell it to pay off men you owe, and hand my house to a stranger in a good suit, and you've told yourself the word for that is caring for me." I shook my head slow. "Baby, I have watched a good man forget my name. I know what it is to lose your mind. This isn't that. You haven't lost your mind, Damon. You've lost your nerve. And someone found you while it was gone." He stared at me. His mouth opened and nothing came out. Whatever he'd braced himself to hear, it wasn't that. For just a second, something flickered in his eyes, some old buried recognition, the boy under the piano trying to surface, and I almost reached for him. But Kessler was already there, a hand on my son's shoulder, steering. "Damon, we should go. You don't need to do this to yourself." And my boy let himself be turned, and he walked away down that long marble hall, and he did not look back at me. That was the bottom. I want you to understand that. Right there in that cold corridor, watching my only child walk away on the arm of the man who was destroying us both. That was the lowest moment of my life, lower than the funeral, lower than the bank lobbies, lower than anything. My son had stood up in open court and told a judge his mother had lost her mind, and then he had chosen the stranger over me, and there was nothing left in the world I could hold on to, except one thing. Denise came and stood beside me at the window. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she put her hand over mine, and she said it very softly. "Miss Lara, we have something in there that they have never seen, something they don't know exists." She squeezed my fingers. "It's time." I opened my old leather purse. I took out my phone and I held it in both hands, the way you hold something that is either going to save your life or won't. 7 years of the truth. And one afternoon a smiling man had forgotten to be afraid of. Yes, I said, it is. When court resumed, Denise rose and said the words that turned every head in the room. Your Honor, the respondent calls Nia Bennett. For a moment, nobody understood. Then Damon understood, and I watched the blood leave my son's face because Nia Bennett was his daughter, his own child. 16 years old in the navy cardigan I'd given her for Christmas, walking up the center aisle of that courtroom with her chin level and her back straight. Lord, she stood the way Samuel used to stand, and she took the oath in a clear, steady voice and sat down facing the room that had come to erase her grandmother. Damon half rose from his chair. Hale put a hand on his arm. There was nothing either of them could do. Denise was gentle with her. Nia, you love your father, don't you? Yes, ma'am. No hesitation. Very much. And you love your grandmother? Yes, ma'am. Then I'm only going to ask you to tell the truth, whatever it costs. Can you do that? That's why I came, she said. And then in the flat, unhurried voice of a young person who has decided the truth is simpler than lying, my granddaughter took the whole thing apart. She testified that she had been in the house more than once when Mr. Kessler came to talk to her father, and that Kessler had coached him, told him what to write down, told him which words to use with the doctor. Say she seems disoriented. Say she left the stove on. Judges eat that up. She said her father hadn't wanted to. She'd heard him argue. She'd heard Kessler talk him back into it every time the way you talk a nervous man off a ledge in the wrong direction. Then Hale, trying to recover, asked her the question he thought was safe. Nia, isn't it possible you simply don't want to believe your grandmother is unwell? That this is hard for you to accept? She looked at him like he'd asked something foolish. My grandmother teaches me music theory every Wednesday, Nia said. She knows the circle of fifths better than my teacher. She remembers the name of every single kid who ever sat on that couch first, middle, and last. Last week she corrected my algebra. She turned then and she looked right at me, and her voice did not shake, but her eyes filled. She is not confused. She has never once been confused about me. The room was dead silent. My dad's scared about money, she went on, quieter now. Because of my insulin, because of my monitor and my doctors. I know it costs a lot. I'm not stupid. A breath. But he didn't have to take Grandma's house. He didn't have to do any of this. She wiped her face with the back of her hand once and steadied. He only had to ask her. She would have given it. He only ever had to ask her one thing. I heard my son make a sound, then a low, broken sound like something giving way inside a wall, and when I looked over, Damon had put his face in his hands. Denise let the silence hold. Then she said, Your Honor, the petitioners have built their entire case on the claim that Laura Bennett cannot keep track of her own life. I'd like to introduce what she's been doing with her life. For the last 7 years, every single day Mrs. Bennett has made an audio journal, a dated, organized record of her medications, her appointments, her visitors. Thousands of entries. It began when she was nursing her husband through dementia so that his care would never slip. She paused. The petitioners called her forgetful. I'd like the court to hear how a forgetful woman keeps records, specifically the recording from the afternoon of February the 9th. Hale was on his feet. Objection, Your Honor, we have no notice of this, and a recording of a private conversation is. Georgia is a one-party consent state counselor, Denise said evenly. Mrs. Bennett was a party to every conversation in her own kitchen, and the recording was made on her own phone in her own home. It's admissible, and you know it. Judge Price looked at Hale for a long, level moment. I'll allow it. Play it. Here is what the courtroom did not know, and what I need you to understand. On the afternoon of February the 9th, I had been so heavily fogged by those pills that I'd gone up to lie down in the middle of the day, something I never did. Kessler and Damon sat down at my kitchen table to talk, and they talked freely, openly, without lowering their voices, because they believed the drugged old woman upstairs was too far gone to hear a thing or understand it if she did. They forgot about the phone on the counter, recording the way it did every single day. Denise pressed play and Brandon Kessler's smooth, warm voice filled that courtroom, and I watched the color drain out of his face as he listened to himself. Relax. Damon, the house appraises at $740 easy, and once the conservatorship goes through, we run the fees and the reverse mortgage, and it's clean. Look, these old houses over here. These black families been sitting on this land for 40 years. This neighborhood's turning, they sell for real money now. Your mother's sitting on a gold mine, she doesn't even laugh. And don't worry about how she looks in court. The medication's got her nice and foggy, we just keep her that way till the hearing she'll present exactly how we need her to. Confused. Sweet. Done. Keep her that way. The medication. In his own voice, in his own words, the whole thing, the poisoning, the plan, the greed, the contempt. The courtroom erupted. Judge Price called for order, and Brandon Kessler, the smiling man, the patient man, the man who had done this to 2 other families and thought he'd found a third, lost the one thing he'd never lost before, his composure. He shot to his feet. She edited that. That's out of context. She's been recording people without... He caught himself half a sentence too late, but everyone had already heard it. Not I never said that. Instead, she recorded me. An admission wearing an objection's clothes. Denise didn't even raise her voice. For the record, the witness has just confirmed the recording is authentic. She turned to the bench and laid down a thin stack of papers. And these are the pharmacy records, Your Honor. Mrs. Bennett's blood pressure prescription was altered about 5 months ago. The dosage changed, a second compound added by the care coordinator Mr. Kessler placed in her home. Her regular physician never ordered it. When Mrs. Bennett stopped taking the altered medication, her so-called cognitive decline vanished in a week. There was never anything wrong with this woman's mind. She looked at Kessler. There was something very wrong with his. I sat perfectly still in Samuel's blue dress, my hands folded on my purse, and I watched the whole thing turn. The recording had all but won it. Denise could have rested. But when she leaned close and whispered, "You don't have to get up there, Miss Lara. We've got it," I shook my head. "No," I said. "I've spent this whole day letting other people tell this room who I am. I'll tell it myself." So I walked up to that stand in my husband's favorite blue dress, and I took the oath in a steady voice, and I sat down and faced the room that had come to erase me. Mr. Hale rose for cross-examination. His case was in ruins, and he knew it. And a cornered man will always reach for the same trick he will try to make the old woman stumble in public, because if she stumbles even once, maybe the room forgets everything else. He came at me fast, the way you try to trip someone on a stair. "Mrs. Bennett, what is today's date?" "Thursday the 11th, I said. "It's been on the calendar in my kitchen for 3 weeks. I circled it. "Your home address, 1406 Maple Grove. Bought it in 1986. Paid it off in 2011. I looked at him. "I could tell you the closing costs if you'd like." A soft, surprised sound went through the gallery. Hale's jaw tightened. "You claim to recall a great deal," he said. "But memory fails, doesn't it, Mrs. Bennett? It fails all of us in time." And then he reached for the cruelest thing he had, and I saw him decide to use it. "Your late husband, he suffered from dementia, didn't he? He lost his memory entirely before he died. So tell the court, ma'am, how can you possibly be sure you won't forget the same way he forgot?" The room went absolutely still. I think he expected me to break there. I think that was the whole plan, to reach into the freshest grief I had and press on it until the old woman wept, and a weeping old woman looks like a confused one. I felt the whole courtroom hold its breath. I felt Damon, somewhere behind me, stop breathing altogether. I did not rush. You never rush the hard passage. "Young man," I said, and my voice was quiet, and it did not shake. I sat for 3 years and watched my husband's memory leave him one room at a time. I watched it take the names of our friends, and then the names of our streets, and then at the very end, my name. Do you know what I did? Every single night, I recorded the day out loud so that I would never forget one moment of who that man was, even as he forgot me. I let that settle. So don't you sit there and ask me whether I know what forgetting looks like. I have held it in my arms. I fed it breakfast. I know exactly what it looks like, and sir, it does not look like me. I leaned forward just slightly. I am not forgetting anything. I am refusing to let a man in a good suit take the things I still remember. Nobody moved. Judge Price was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, and Hale had no next question because there wasn't one. But I wasn't finished. I turned then away from him, and I faced the whole room, the gallery, the strangers, the neighbors who'd come my granddaughter with her tear-streaked face and her level chin. You want to know if my mind still works, I said. Then let me introduce you to it. And I began to say their names. Terence Ellis Booker, who came to me at 7 with 2 left hands and left at 12 playing Chopin. Danielle Rose Ferguson, who cried every lesson for a year and now teaches choir in Savannah. The Alston twins Gabriel and Gideon, who I could never tell apart until Gabriel learned the left hand faster. Priscilla Okonkwo. Little James Harper, who couldn't reach the pedals. Deshawn. Angela. The Whitfield girls, all 4 of them, one after another across 9 years. I could feel my voice getting stronger the way it does at the piano when you finally reach the part you love. 31 years of Saturday mornings, 200 and some children on that couch in my living room. I remember their names, their middle names, which ones bit their nails and which ones lied about practicing. I remember the song I taught each of them first. I looked at the judge. A woman who cannot manage her own affairs, is that what she sounds like to you? Then I stood up from that witness stand, smoothed down my husband's blue dress, and I stepped down onto the courtroom floor. I walked back to my seat with my head up, and I did not look at my son. Not once. Not because I hated him, I have never for 1 second been able to hate him, but because if I had looked at Damon in that moment at his face and his hands, I would have wept, and I had one more thing left to do that day that required me not to. I sat down. I folded my hands on my purse, and we waited for the judge. Judge Eleanor Price did not take long. She came back to the bench, and she settled her glasses, and she looked out over that room for a moment before she spoke at Kessler, at the lawyers, at my son with his face gray as ash, and last at me sitting in my husband's blue dress with my hands folded on my purse. In my 30 years on this bench, she said, I have seen a great many petitions for conservatorship. Most of them are brought in love. Some are brought in weakness, and a very few are brought in something far worse. She let that sit. The petition before me claims that Laura Bennett is unable to manage her own affairs. I have rarely in 3 decades heard a witness manage anything so completely as Mrs. Bennett managed this courtroom today. She denied the petition in full. She declared me competent wholly unconditionally on the record. And then her voice changed, and it went cold in a way that made even Hale look at the floor. The court further finds credible evidence that Mrs. Bennett's apparent decline was deliberately induced through the alteration of her medication, and that this was done in furtherance of a scheme to strip her of her home and assets. That is not a family matter. That is a crime. She turned to the clerk. I'm referring Mr. Brandon Kessler and Heritage Legacy Advisors to the District Attorney's Office for immediate investigation, including... And here she paused. The 2 prior matters counsel raised involving other elderly homeowners in this county. Someone should have looked into this a long time ago. They took Kessler's smile right there in the courtroom. I watched it come off his face like a mask coming off, and underneath it there was nothing at all, just a man who had run out of families to feed on. He didn't look dangerous anymore. He looked small and ordinary, and I remember thinking that this was the true face of the thing that had nearly swallowed my life. Not a monster, just a tired man in a good suit who had decided a long time ago that other people's whole lives were his to spend. The bailiff didn't cuff him. That would come later in another courtroom. But 2 officers stepped up close, and Kessler gathered his papers with hands that had started at last to shake. For 1 second, his eyes found mine across that room. I did not look away, and I did not gloat. I just let him see that the old woman he'd tried to erase had watched the whole thing and remembered every second of it. Then he was gone through the side door, and the man who'd measured my house for its bones never looked at me again. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest with you about that, because the videos always end with the wronged woman laughing in victory, and that is not how it felt. I felt tired, and I felt sad, and mostly I felt a quiet so deep it was almost like grief. I had won, but winning had cost me the sight of my son testifying against me, and no verdict on earth gives that back. The judge's gavel came down, and the room began to empty and rearrange itself around the next case, the next family, the next quiet catastrophe, the way courthouses do. Somewhere behind me, I could feel Damon still sitting, not moving, a man who'd walked into that room, certain he was saving his mother, and would walk out of it having been shown in front of everyone exactly what he'd nearly done. I gathered my purse. I thanked Denise, who held both my hands and said, "You did that. Not me. You—" And I let myself believe her a little. And I walked out of that courthouse into the afternoon sun alone, past the reporters and the strangers, and Miss Ruthie waiting on the steps with her arms already open, and for the first time in months, the air tasted like my own life again. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot for a long time before I could drive. Then I took out my phone, the same phone that had just saved my whole life, and I called Denise. "It's over," I told her, and it was. But that isn't why I called. "I need you to do one more thing for me. When the district attorney comes asking, and I don't want you to help them build a case against Damon." She was quiet a moment. "Miss Lara, your son put you through this. He testified against you. Legally, he's exposed, but you'd have every right to." "I know what I'd have a right to," I said. "I'm telling you what I want. Go after Kessler. Bury him. But my son was a drowning man, and that shark told him it was a life raft. I won't punish him for grabbing it." And then I told Denise the thing I had never told anyone, the thing I had been holding behind my teeth through that entire trial, the reason I had been able to sit so still while they buried me. 2 months before any of this began, before the papers, before the fog, back when I first started to notice how gray and hunted my son looked, how he flinched when Nia's name came up next to the word insurance, I had already gone quietly to see a lawyer. Not to protect myself from Damon, to help him. I had already begun arranging to cover Nia's medical costs myself. I had already set money aside for her insulin, her monitors, her specialists, for as long as that child would need them. I was ready to help with the shop, too. It was done. It was waiting. All my son ever had to do was come to me and say, "Mama, I'm scared, and I can't keep my little girl well, and I don't know what to do." That's all. One question, the same one his own daughter named from that witness stand, he only had to ask. He never asked. Instead, a man in a good suit found him first and taught him that the way to save his family was to take his mother apart. And so I did not go into that courtroom to destroy my son. I went in to cut the hooks out of him, to pull him back off that shark's line before it dragged him all the way under and left his name on every crime. The recording didn't just clear me. It cleared him. It showed the world he was Kessler's mark, not Kessler's partner. The strongest thing I brought into that room was not the phone in my purse. It was that I had already forgiven him before he ever did me wrong. I never told him that. I'm not sure I ever will. Some things you do for your children without letting them carry the weight of knowing. I would love to tell you that Damon came home that night and fell into my arms, and we cried, and it was mended. It wasn't. Real life doesn't close as neatly as a song. For a long while he couldn't even look at me. The shame sat on him too heavy. He'd call and not speak. Just breathe on the line, and I'd say, "I know, baby, I know, when you're ready," and hang up gentle. Kessler's reckoning came slower than the movies would have it, but it came. The district attorney's office, once it started pulling the thread Denise handed them, could not stop pulling. It turned out Brandon Kessler and Heritage Legacy Advisors had not done this to just 2 families or 3. They had done it 11 times across 2 counties over 6 years. Always the same kind of mark. Always an older homeowner, most of them black. Most of them sitting on paid-off houses in neighborhoods that developers had started to circle. Some had fought it off. Some hadn't. 2 had already died in rented rooms in houses that had been theirs, and I have never been able to think about that without my hands going cold. He was indicted on 14 counts. The care coordinator who'd changed my pills took a deal and told the prosecutors everything, and the thing she told them over and over was that it had been Kessler's idea every time. One afternoon that summer, an old man came to my door. 81 years old, hat in his hands, a retired postal worker named Clarence Whitmore, one of the 2 family names Vanessa had written on my grocery pad. He'd read about my case in the paper. He'd lost his house on Delmar Street 2 years before the house he'd raised 5 children in to the exact same smile and the exact same paperwork, and he'd spent those 2 years believing it had been his own foolishness, his own failing mind. He stood on my porch, and he wept, this dignified old man, because the verdict in my case had told him something no one else ever had, that he had not been weak and he had not been stupid. He had been hunted. "They made me think it was me," he kept saying. "All this time, I thought it was me." I made him come in. I sat him down at the piano and I played him something slow, and we were 2 old people in a quiet room who had been told they were empty and had turned out to be full the whole time. His case was one of the 14. He got a settlement in the end. Not his house back, you rarely get the house back, but his name cleared and the knowledge that the man who took it would answer for it. Some justice arrives too late to fix the wound and just in time to stop the bleeding. I've learned to be grateful for that kind too. The neighborhood learned it hadn't only been them, hadn't only been their fault, hadn't been weakness at all. That mattered. That mattered more than I can say. And then one Saturday morning in the spring, I was in my kitchen when I heard it. The piano. Someone was playing in my living room. Clean, careful scales, then the opening of a little Chopin waltz played slow. I came to the doorway, and there was Nia at the keys, 16 years old, and frowning at her own fingers, the way she did her insulin monitor clipped to her waistband, working through the piece I'd taught her that winter. My husband's piano, the one he built with his own 2 hands, singing again on a Saturday morning the way it had for 31 years. And out on the front porch, through the screen door, I saw 2 figures standing very still listening, Damon, and Vanessa beside him, her hand in his. My son had come to the edge of the house he'd once tried to take from me, and he'd stopped at the door because he didn't believe he had the right to come in. He just stood on that porch in the morning light and listened to his daughter play his mother's piano, and I watched his shoulders shake. I could have left the screen door shut. I had every right to. I crossed the room and I opened it. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I just opened the door and left it open, and I went and sat down on the piano bench next to my granddaughter, and I put my hands over hers to show her the next chord the way I'd shown 200 children before her. And behind me, after a long moment, I heard the screen door creak, and I heard my son's footsteps come slow and uncertain into the house he grew up in. He didn't come all the way. Not that day. He just stood at the back of the room. But he came inside. That was the beginning. Small, but mine to give. People ask me when they hear this story whether I ever got my revenge on the woman on Kessler on all of it. And I tell them they've misunderstood the whole thing. I didn't destroy anyone. I didn't have to. I simply took back the power they'd stolen to destroy me, and I refused all the way down to the bone to let anybody tell me I had lost the one thing I never lost. They brought me into that courtroom to prove I couldn't remember my own name, but I remembered everything. Every child on that couch. Every note my husband ever played with 2 clumsy fingers. Every morning of a marriage they said I was too far gone to recall. I remembered all of it, and in the end remembering was the thing that saved me. Wherever you're listening from tonight, I hope you'll do one thing for me. Look at the people around you who've grown old and quiet, the ones the world has started to talk past. Sit down beside them. Ask them to tell you something they remember. You would be amazed what's still in there. You would be amazed what they're still holding and holding for you. My son said I couldn't remember my own name, but I remembered everything, and that is exactly why he lost. The end.